Well, the nation continues to battle the opioid crisis while the Tennessee Department of Health kicks off a new campaign on opioid education. Tonight, Cindy Edwards shows us one of the many faces of opioid addiction, not one of an addict, but the face of a daughter who grew up with a drug-addicted mother. Cindy, when it comes to drug abuse, when and where does it start?
Kim, Wendy Wild's story started over 30 years ago when her mother was first prescribed painkillers after being injured at work. Now, according to the drugabuse.gov website, it's around that time frame when there was a widespread misuse of drugs. And that was because the medical community didn't believe opioids were so addictive.
She was a brilliant nurse and could have done so much more if she wouldn't have limited herself.
Wendy Wild remembers her mother as being smart and funny, even though addiction ruled her mother's choices and eventually caused her death 10 years ago.
I changed schools 19 times. We moved 26 times. And it was just a catastrophe because there's never enough money to take care of your children and to take care of your habit.
Wendy says her story is no different from many others who grew up with drug abuse in the household because what happened behind closed doors was pretty much the same.
I was recently talking to somebody and we were going through the bad part of town, and they said, I guess there's a lot of drug houses there. And I said, there's a lot of drug houses in my neighborhood. The only thing that changes is the drug that they use.
Wendy's mother, Susan, had the typical drug addict personality traits. She isolated her children and manipulated people for money. Wendy says she was so toxic that there was a time when they didn't speak for 6 years. She was taking PCP drugs when she overdosed and suffered a stroke.
She didn't think at 15 years old that she wanted to grow up and be an addict and, treat people like garbage because she was an addict.
Wendy says she doesn't think 30 years ago her mother, or really doctors for that matter, realized that painkillers could lead to an addiction, even if they were prescribed because of a typical work injury.
It's imperative that grandparents get rid of the drugs and dispose of them the way that they need to be disposed of, and that parents keep them out of just the generalized medicine cabinet. It's imperative that we do better now because we know better.
Wendy says there is no face to opioid addiction because it could be any one of us.
And I think that as long as we pigeonhole and stereotype what addiction looks like, we're going to continue to miss addiction around us. And as long as we're missing addiction, we're missing being able to treat the addict.
While Wendy says it's not the drug that is the problem here, it's the person, while Wendy says it's not the person that is the villain in the story here, it's the drug itself. She says if her mother was here today, the one thing she would tell her is that she understands now. None of this was ever her fault. Reporting live out of the NewsChannel 9 newsroom, I'm Cindy Edwards. Kim?
Cindy, thank you very much. And Wendy says she's educated her own daughter on addiction ever since she could understand it. And she says at any point, drug abuse can become a problem. And if we assume we know what addiction looks like, we'll continue to live in denial.